Hi, this is Carrie, and welcome to Tandem Talks, a podcast meant to empower you to live your life your way.
And I'm Craig. Join us as we go deeper with entrepreneurs and their journey creating success in business and life. Hello, all. Welcome to the Tandem Talks Podcast. We are here with a very special guest that we're excited and really thankful for her time today. We're going to have a lot of great insights, and that is Laurie Barkman. She has a remarkable background. Obviously, education-wise, she actually studied at the University of Copenhagen, I believe, and then also has her BS at Cornell, as well as, graduate school in, let's see, which university? There's so many here. That's Carnegie Mellon, actually, yes. She's an M&A advisor. She's certified in that arena. She's also a business transition advisor. Helping companies anywhere from, 1 to 50 million make a lot of those transitions. So she's seen and done a lot of cool stuff. She's also a certified national speaker. She's an adjunct professor at Carnegie Mellon, also has her own podcast, and her list of volunteerism is lengthy. It's in the double digits in terms of organizations and board members and every different thing that she's been a part of, including a lot of things around women in business. Which I know is a hot button for Carrie and myself as well. So thank you for being with us. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about your journey to business ownership, entrepreneurship, and then we'll just open up a discussion and see how we can help the listeners out. So thanks for being with us, Laurie.
Thanks, Craig and Carrie. It's so great to be with you both. And I appreciate the opportunity to share my story. Yeah, I appreciate the background. It was a lengthy list, and everyone's probably like, "Whoa, take a breath," right?
Yeah. Well,
and
sorry, I messed up the
back,
university. Yeah.
As I look back and I think about kind of where I've been and where I'm going, the best way to describe it is very much intrapreneurial and entrepreneurial. And I think if I'm really honest with myself, I've always had the entrepreneurial bug, but never had the courage to do it fully. And when I was in high school, I didn't really think that way. It was just get stuff done and take charge. And I grew in my leadership skills. And eventually I got this idea, the vision one day to be a CEO and started out in my career in a growth field, marketing, right? How do I help organizations grow? And that's when I went into marketing after graduating from Carnegie Mellon. I should mention too, my studies at Cornell was focused on industrial and labor relations, which you're like, wow, what's that? Well, I went into human resources. So what is HR? For me, it was the psychology of business. And ultimately, what is marketing? The psychology of business. So it just really clicked, and I switched gears from the manufacturing industry into high tech and marketing and technology, product marketing. And so that pivot was by way of getting my master's and ultimately figuring out, I really like helping organizations grow. I really like the strategy, but I never had the courage to start my own thing until later in my life, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And as you said in my introduction, I have my own firm and I work with entrepreneurs to help them achieve their goals and their vision for what's next for them. And my firm is called SmallDotBig. So we could probably talk about that too. Why did I name it that? That's kind of a crazy name. But all the things in between, Carrie and Craig, I think are these micro pivots where I'm trying to figure out, where do I want to be? Who do I want to work for? All those things. And the answer was always someone else. I didn't really see working for myself because I felt that I didn't have the big idea. When I was in the tech space, specifically with startups, you see these entrepreneurs, they're tech savvy. They have this crazy new thing and they build a team around it.
Huge, massive vision, right?
Massive vision.
So I like the phraseology that you said, Laurie, about micro pivots, because I think people are always thinking like this big pivot, and people talk about business ownership as like, I'm going to jump off the dock into the deep ocean and I'm going to try to survive. And we say, think about like walking along the beach, right? Like you just go in a little further, you take one more step, the water feels good, you take one more step. And so you do have some control, especially if you're not all in, $10 million investment, huge fundraising. There's ways to build things as we talk about a lot as a side hustle. So I think the micro pivots is a good way to put it, for sure.
Well, and I think it alludes to a series of choices, right? Not just one big high pressure decision, but a series of choices. And I think in so many ways that empowers people and helps us feel like we are in control of the next half step that we take. And it sounds like that is representative of your journey and how you've gotten to where you are. And I do want to hear about how you named your company SmallDotBig.
Absolutely. It's kind of a funny story. I was playing billiards with someone from Australia.
I like the story already. Billiards
Perfect.
with someone from Australia.
Yeah, it's kind of random. And, here in the US, if you play pool, we call it solids or stripes, right? As you look at the ball, it's a solid or it's a stripe. Well, in Australia, they say small dot or big dot. And when I was thinking about naming my firm, of course, I was, marketing, trying to be all markety. However, I think there's a couple of layers to the name. So one is up to the right, things that grow up to the right, small to big. The graphic reflects that from small to big. So SmallDotBig. The URL is SmallDotBig.com, right? So that's kind of a play on there. But ultimately, the underlying thing is, how do I help people see things differently? Once you've seen small dot, big dot, when you're playing billiards, you can't unsee it. And so it's this different perspective that really hit me when I was thinking about that story. And that's why I named the firm SmallDotBig.
I love it. Layers and layers and layers. That's very, very cool.
So let's go zoom in a little bit, and we didn't get to hear the full story. So maybe you can finish out after you give us a little bit of your mindset. You were saying you're a little hesitant. You didn't see yourself as like the business owner or the entrepreneur, right? So just walk us through a little bit on your mindset, maybe on how you powered through that, right? And came out the other side that, hey, I can own a business. Because I think most of us are conditioned not to. Yeah. Like we just, especially in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't like, oh, you just start a tech company, right? And I don't know your age, but I knew like, it was like, I'm not going to start Nintendo when I was, 12 years old in 1990, whatever. So maybe just talk about how you made that shift and then how that journey's progressed.
Yeah, I'll call myself an internet old timer, but put ourselves back in 1997. This was when I was in business school. So the internet was a thing. Amazon, I actually saved my first purchase receipt from Amazon. I still have it, which is so funny.
1997? Seriously?
Yeah.
Wow. Impressive.
Yeah. I bought a book. I bought a book written by Bill Gates. Thought it was very appropriate. Anyway, in 1997, the internet was a thing. There were definitely businesses. And by 1999, there was a .com bust. So there was a big boom. Everybody was jumping on this bandwagon, trying to figure it all out. And then the market kind of tanked. So in my experience, what I was trying to get familiar with was the venture capital side. I have a tech idea. I'm going to launch a company. I'm going to get smart people around me, and off I go. And when I was in business school, I kind of wanted that, but I did not have the tech partner who had the big idea and then I would be the marketing person. I just didn't find that person. Maybe I didn't look in the right places. Instead, what I did was I networked into the ecosystem here in Pittsburgh, which back in those days was pretty early stage and a great time to network in. I joined a firm in an internship, which was pretty cool. They got bought by Lycos, which at the time was the number 2 search engine. And it was an internship. So I thought, oh gosh, I'm now without a job. This is 1 week before I'm supposed to start my job. I called the alumni, Rob Frasca, who was running the company. And I said, hey, Rob, I just saw the press release. Do I still have a job? And he was like, well, can you get on a plane and fly to Boston every week? And I'm thinking, heck yeah. So great. So I had this internship where it was 1 foot in Pittsburgh in the company that was acquired, and then the other foot in this giant headquarters in Boston with Lycos, which again was just one position behind Yahoo. And that was really interesting because all of a sudden I saw what's it like on call it the small team side, and then what's it look like in corporate trying to integrate this big, this acquisition.
Yeah.
And then when I graduated, I took that step to work for an established startup rather, again, than start my own thing. So that was my early path to it. And what that did was it put me in a position to learn a lot and understand a little bit more about fundraising and what's that dynamic, and how are you building your brand, and how are you building the metrics that you need to convince people to make an exchange with you, which is money. What's going to get them to pay for the product or service that you have? And then how does that scale? And that's really, really hard. And so watching that happen for a few years, you know what I did? I said, you know what? I'm punching out of startup land. I'm going to Big Co. And I went to American Eagle Outfitters, which was awesome. That was a great place to be, great place to land. And that's what started my intrapreneurship experience. I worked for the early AE.com, which is now a multi-billion-dollar business just by itself. I remember the t-shirt we celebrated. We made t-shirts because we were a clothing company that said 74 million. I mean, we hit 74 million in those early days. And now look at this, this juggernaut. And I was part of an amazing team that helped build that business. And again, they're still growing today. So to answer your question about how do you know and how do you not know, it's really, really tricky. But for me, it was about exploring different options and learning at a time when, sure, there were people trying this entrepreneurial thing and raising money, but that's all I saw. I didn't see the other options for entrepreneurship that I see now at the lens that I have now.
Right.
And we could talk about that too. But back then in 97 and 99, it was, oh, you want to be an entrepreneur? You got to start a tech company.
Yep.
Well, and I'm sure as an adjunct professor, you see a lot in terms of just next generation making their move within entrepreneurship and just what people are maybe interested in dabbling in, and even just the wide variety of choices that people have in, the 21st century, 2022 at this point. So I'd be curious just what your observations are. What are some pitfalls you see, some things to look out for if someone's listening in today and really exploring their options?
If someone wants to own a business, or do they want to be a business owner? I think that's where the conversation could start. What's the difference between the two? Well, one might look at it as a lifestyle. I want to have my own business. I want to be a business owner because ultimately it's going to give me the lifestyle that I want to live. So flexibility in my life with my kids or my partner, traveling and balance the things I enjoy. And for many people, that's happiness. They don't need $1 million a year. They just want to live this lifestyle, and they ultimately want to run their own show.
Right.
So that's one thing in common. The other side of it is a business owner, someone who owns a business is a little more of that arm's length. They may own ultimately multiple businesses. Mm-hmm. There's different archetypes of people who we encounter in my line of business. One is a mountain climber type of archetype, and they are maybe a serial entrepreneur. They're very motivated by the next thing. They may need to build that team around them and that big following. And ultimately, they may be the ones who call themselves the owner of a business because they see the value in building something and having some others take it to the next level. The other archetype is more, there's actually three. One is called a craftsperson. And a craftsperson has a skill. This could be an accountant or lawyer, could be a doctor, dentist. Sure. The carpenter, they essentially, a craftsperson takes a lot of pride in the skill that they have. And then they form a business around it. Mm-hmm. And then the third type is, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name. I apologize, but it begins with an F. It'll come to me. And so this person is, hold on, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to look up behind me on the little cheat sheet that I have. This person is about maintaining this identity with their business. So the separation is more difficult for them than it would be for the mountain climber or for the craftsperson. And they tend to stay in their business a very, very long time. Freedom fighter. There it is. Freedom fighter. So a freedom fighter, they too really value control. All three archetypes do, but the freedom fighter, most of all, is the one who probably will say, I am a business owner, and they will probably own that business for 20 years or longer.
Very interesting.
It's fascinating.
I feel like we could go so deep on that rabbit hole. I wonder too, like I think about my own journey, and now I feel a little more of a serial, whereas I feel a little more like the freedom fighter, maybe if you caught me 10 years ago. And I think part of it too is just like our experiences and knowing what we're capable of as well, and what we feel like we need to attach our identity to versus what we can. And that there's just so much opportunity out there. I think once you start, if you're listening to this, once you start to grow a business and you've created success, like you get past that hump, it's like everything looks like an opportunity. I mean, it's like, I just,
well, you have the confidence to think of everything as an opportunity, I think. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, it's hard to see any business. It's hard to go into a church. It's hard to do anything and not see like opportunity I think for me. And I think, Carrie, you probably feel the same way. So yeah, but it's interesting to go into those archetypes. Do you think that some of those are really custom designed by the person's environment and that's more conditioning? Or do you think that that's like an internal, kind of the nurture versus nature?
I don't know. My hunch would be it is nurture versus, it is more inherited, that you are inherently, you are who you are, and you're going to follow the path that just makes most sense for you.
Yeah.
This concept of cognitive dissonance, in fact, from psychology,
right.
If you're at a protest, you're not going to be at that protest protesting unless you inherently probably believe, because you're saying yes, yes. And this action of saying yes to something or doing something, your brain can't reconcile it if you're not going to do it unless you inherently agree with it. Right. So that's why I'm saying what I'm saying. But are there people that change their vantage point over time? Yeah, probably. Could you be a mountain climber and then change to a freedom fighter? Sure. But it's probably very unlikely for someone like me. I'm a mountain climber, so I'll just talk about myself. Very unlikely for me to become a craftsperson. I can't. I have a really good friend. He's a wonderful carpenter. But by day, he works for an investment bank, and he wears a suit, and we're just like, wow, that is just so not, he's not necessarily probably following his life passions in his career. We all can see that he's a craftsperson, but he's probably operating more as a freedom fighter. So nonetheless, the other way I wanted to answer your question, Carrie, is there's a presentation that I do for the MBA students. I've done it now twice. And it's built off of this question of, well, what types of entrepreneurs are there? Steve Blank wrote an article about this a number of years ago. So if you Google Steve Blank's article, you'll find it. The title was 4 Types of Entrepreneurship. And I use that as my inspiration for my presentation, but I call it 8 types of entrepreneurship. I doubled him because the reality is there are more types out there. And so I do share with the students, what are different types of entrepreneur? Who are they? Give them some examples. And when I compare back to my experience when I was in business school, there was really one type, which was this creator. I'm going to invent something new and I'm going to create something new. And that's why in my story, I thought I couldn't be an entrepreneur because I didn't have the big idea. And as I have been in business so many more years now, looking back, 25 plus years later, here I am saying I'm an entrepreneur. Well, how so? And I think there are others who explore other paths. Another big path, you had asked about trends, another big path that you don't have to be an MBA student to take this path, by the way. I'm just giving that perspective from my experience, but are people who are buying companies. They're acquiring businesses. They're getting an SBA loan from the government, or they're getting a loan from friends or family. You may have heard about search funds, where there's a pool of money you're raising from investors for you to go find a business to buy. Now, that's a trend from MBA school for sure. Nonetheless, there are people who are in the working world. Now, when I'm an M&A advisor, a mergers and acquisitions advisor, I work for sellers of businesses, people who are ready to retire and they want to, they're in this path of letting their business go and finding the right buyer. I also represent buyers. So I've had really interesting conversations on both sides of the table. And there's one particular situation I'm working about with a buyer now. I represent the seller, but I've had some great conversations with the buyer, and he's considering leaving his full-time job. He wants to do this because he is probably more of a freedom fighter and wants the control of his future destiny. He wants to create wealth for his family, and he wants to buy an existing business. It is, quote unquote, easier than starting something from scratch. It's not easy, right? But you could make the case that running an established business, the train's already moving. You're just jumping onto it as opposed to laying down the tracks. So, Carrie, I think that this is a trend. It's not a new trend. It's been around a while, but for people who are really interested in exploring other options and think starting your own thing from scratch is the way to get there, I'll say to them, hey, think again. The other thing I would say about this notion of I can't start a business unless it's new and this crazy technology, I'd say, let's think about that. Let's unpack that and point to all kinds of examples. The type of entrepreneur that we call an imitator. It's not a negative, it's just a descriptor. So there's lots of amazing examples there. And if you want, I can share the link to my presentation. It's on YouTube with your audience if they want to give it a listen to the 8 different types of entrepreneurs and see where they may fall in that spectrum. That's what I encourage the students is first and foremost to think about what their goals are, who they are, and thinking ahead to the types of people they want to work with and how they feel when they're in that environment. Some people say, I don't want to be a boss. I don't want to have a boss. Okay, that's fine. So you're going to be a craftsperson. Maybe you're going to take up a specific trade and you can do your own thing, especially now with Zoom. You can have an amazing yoga studio in your living room and have clients and never, have to see anybody. There's those types of businesses. So I'm giving you just an extreme example on one side, but I love that people today can explore so many things. The wonderful world of the internet has given us a crazy amount of more options, I think, than when I had and I was exploring, 25 plus years ago.
Well, I appreciate you expanding the definition of entrepreneurship because it's interesting if someone's parents or the association they had growing up think more of that creator mindset exclusively. I think it holds people back from really knowing that, hey, there's tons of options, all with different pros and cons and features and benefits, and helps people figure out ways to get their foot in a door in a more practical way. And it'd be great to get that link. I would love to actually go through that presentation, and I'm sure you've got a million questions. So
always.
Yeah.
Do you have one though, or?
Oh, I've got a lot, but I'll pass them. I'll bounce pass.
All right. This is the no look bounce pass. She telegraphed it a bit, but the idea then is people are getting going and we talk about, you're using different vernacular, but we talk about being a business owner doesn't mean you have to be an entrepreneur, where I think of like the entrepreneurs like the Elon Musk, and a business owner owns 10 McDonald's, right? Just as like a simple way to define it. But that's basically what you're starting to do, probably just in more detail with the different archetypes and the eight types of entrepreneurs. When you start to see people get going, let's transition. Let's say they figured something out. They found a system, or they've used a pre-built platform, or they're building something from scratch. What are some of the biggest, maybe 1 or 2 of the top things you do well? Because again, folks, we're listening to someone who's an actual business owner who deals with people transitioning their businesses and is an adjunct professor of entrepreneurship for Carnegie Mellon. So you might be one of the most qualified people in the world to start to speak to this in terms of trends and what you're seeing out there in the marketplace right now.
The number one thing is to be clear about who you are, why you're doing what you're doing, and who are you doing it for. Mm-hmm. There's a shorthand 1-pager, which is called the business model canvas.
Yep.
And small companies to big companies can use this tool. I think it's very commonly used in startups. But if you are an entrepreneur starting something from scratch, you are a startup. Congratulations. Mm-hmm. I have been a startup. And yes, I've tried to eat my own dog food in trying to use this type of tool. I also have used it with clients and we use it with students. It's a great tool. So the business model canvas, what's on there? Well, it starts out on the left-hand side and kind of works its way to the right. You can find yourself in the middle. There's no particular one way. There's about 9 boxes of things to fill out on this document. And you look at it and you think, oh, I'll fill this out in 5 minutes. If you do that, you're going to fail. Sure. Take your time. It's on the left-hand side. What is your value proposition? Who's your target audience? What is the product or service you're selling? What are the early metrics to prove that this is working for you? How will you measure your success? What is the revenue model? What is the platform you will be on? And the platform could be many, many things. It could be, it's a building, right? Or it's a website, or, platform, right. Meaning however you define it. What are the costs you're going to incur? And ultimately, what do you think you need to be successful? So there's these different elements that go into a business model canvas. So answering your question, Craig, is tricky, because if we don't have any one of those figured out, that's okay. The class I teach is called the Corporate Startup Lab. And what we are doing in that class with master's level students is enabling them to work with companies that have a product or service idea that want to explore. So if we're an entrepreneur starting from scratch, what do we need to do? What is step one? Well, with the students, we say, do competitive research in this space. Understand the ocean you're swimming in, the lake, the pond, the puddle. Where are you stepping in? Where are you swimming in? And that competitive analysis is step one. This landscape helps them identify with the client, which is a larger company that's come to us as a client for the class. And that's a very effective place to start, no matter who you are, right? And what size company you are, is get to know the market you're in. The other side is the definition of the target market. My other aspect here is on the customer side. So thinking about who you're targeting and how you can define that market. So again, in one analogy would be the ocean, the lake, or the pond. And so the total available market, and then ultimately the serviceable market. And those are two very different things, because the total available might be global, but you're not targeting global, you're targeting your state, or you're targeting your city, or you're going to slice the market based on a demographic, gender, household income. There's an enormous amount of ways you can slice the onion on who you're targeting. So to be clear about that helps you identify a market niche. That may be how you define your value prop then to the market niche. That's ultimately segmentation, targeting, and positioning. As a marketing person, that's the ultimate place to start. If we can segment the market, target them, and then position our product or service to them, that's a great formula in the very early stages. And then everything after that, I think, is testing and learning. And this is what we teach in the class, is a concept around the MVP. If you've heard this acronym, the minimum viable product. Sean Amorati, who is the executive director of this program, he likes to call it the minimum awesome product, because he thinks a lot of times MVPs are a piece of crap, which they might be. But nonetheless, what that means is you want to put something in front of a target audience to get early feedback. It can be a piece of paper. It doesn't have to be a working prototype of something, but a piece of paper, a drawing, a schematic, a survey, anything that shows an early promise is good learning for you. And if it's not working, see it as a positive, learn from it, and then make these micro adjustments. I've been doing that now for myself with my firm for the last year and a half, 2 years. And I already had that mindset. That's how I'm wired. That's how I ran my marketing teams for the last 20 years. And when I was a CEO, same thing. I encouraged my teams to know what they're testing, take the time to hindsight it, and then adjust. You got to kind of like wash, rinse, repeat on that. It's really, really important. So even if you're a team of one, it's a process that is something you should consider.
Yeah, and business and the route that you're speaking to is a little more like I would say like hardcore entrepreneur, you are building something from scratch in a lot of ways, right? Versus like, okay, I'm going to buy a franchise, right? Because then a lot of that stuff has been done for you, but there's still some of that still needs to be done on top, I would think. So the canvas, as you call it, the business model canvas is still important. It just might, a lot of the foundational research has already been done. What I think, I mean, there's a lot of interesting elements to that, but I think what's really interesting about business ownership, especially as you get going, but even once you're established, is this balance between taking action and then making corrections, right? And I think Carrie and I have a very interesting balance because I think she tends to be a little bit better at just like, okay, pivot, let's go. We're going to write a book. Boom, we're writing a book. It's like, well, can we think about it for a couple of years? Let's just talk about it, whereas I sometimes can be a little overly analytic and overcompensate. I'd be curious to get your insights on maybe just how you help people balance that component of like, go do something, go learn, because I say the best way to learn about business is to run one, not like theorize, like do the canvas, but don't do the canvas for 6 years. Like do the canvas, take your time, like build it out nice, but then like go learn and make the micro adjustments you're talking about. So is there anything you want to speak to on that particular topic?
Absolutely. First off, I want to say I'm a Gemini. The way you just described the both of you is me wrapped into one. It's me having that analytical and let's go now conversation with myself.
Yeah.
So I can appreciate that. And that's a good balance between the two of you. I do think for people who want to take that next step towards their owning their future, right? They're controlling their destiny, feeling that way a little bit more. Maybe their next step is that trial balloon of a consulting gig on the side, right? As you guys talk about having, and many in your audience who may have the side hustle going. The side hustle in and of itself, if you think about it, based on what I just talked about, is the MVP. It's the minimum viable product. Beautiful. You having a product or service, someone willing to pay you for that, you are learning so much. Mm-hmm. And that has been a big aspect for me in just getting started. 10 plus years ago, when I launched the firm, I was thinking that it would be a side hustle, but I wanted it to be more full-time because I had an opportunity to, I had a career pivot. There was a staff reduction in the place where I had worked. And I was not happy about that. I was sad about that, but I saw it as, hey, you know what? I'm going to try something new. Here's a chance to try something different. And that's when I launched SmallDotBig. But the initial version of SmallDotBig was as a marketing consultancy. And that was my test and learn. And where I got tripped up was doing work and doing business development at the same time. It was this feast or famine kind of, and I didn't have the patience for it. And I think in my household, we didn't have kind of the financial capacity for me to walk away from a full-time salary at that time. Sure. And circumstances are different for me now. Here we are, 25 plus years later, and I am fortunate for that to be able to have some of that latitude now that I didn't have then. And I think that's the other side, is to really know from the economics in your household, what do you really need to be doing? Because you may not truly be ready from a budget standpoint to kind of go all in. So this test and learn side hustle is a great way to ferret that out and see, one, if you would enjoy it, and two, if you're seeing the market demand that you need. And I don't know if I fully answered your question, Craig, but I think for me, the other side is this continuous push forward, and how do you motivate yourself to keep looking ahead. My mom made me laugh the other day. She's like, Laurie, you're just like a whirlwind. She's like, every time she talks to me, I'm saying I'm doing something new. I am writing a book, and I'm coming out with that, and I have the podcast, and I have some folks around me that are either interns or virtual assistants. I have a team that's around the world. I have help someone's in Africa and someone's in Brazil. And that's really fun and very cool to, I think, provide economic opportunities around the world. And also helps me keep my budget low. And when I was managing $100 million marketing budget in my past, I didn't worry about the $50 expense, right? But when you're a business owner and you think about, okay, what does everything cost me? What is the return I'm going to get for that investment? And on the expense and writing the check or coming out of your debit. But reality is, what is your return on time? Return on time as a measure for those of us who have our own business is really important, because we could always be working 24/7. Our jobs are right here and there's no shortage of things to do. I could make a to-do list that's a mile long, because I'm that person. That's how I'm wired. I'll come up with a million things. I know I don't want to do a million things. I don't need to do them. And so how do I wash that down and focus? And that, in a nutshell, is one of the biggest challenges I think entrepreneurs face when they move from being part of a larger entity to their own thing, and finding and keeping that focus.
In our book, we wrote a chapter on decision making. And a big part of that was like how to delegate and how to outsource things. And I do think that's an incredibly challenging thing for a lot of business owners. It's just the ongoing, never ending series of decisions that have to be made and problems that need to be solved within that. So that absolutely speaks to that dynamic. And sometimes how that's a struggle for people, because I don't think most people were trained on how to analytically make decisions for the company they run. So maybe that's an MBA school. We missed that in MBA school potentially, but.
Well, it's different when it's your pocketbook.
Yeah.
When you're working for a big company, a lot of times, what I would hear is we want our people to feel like an owner. What if this was your company and you were making this financial decision? How would you answer it? Would that be different than what you're saying right now? And that's a very common question. But then what happens when you literally are the entrepreneur? It does feel differently, and you're responsible for payroll. The responsibilities of an entrepreneur can be very stressful. It can feel lonely. You have a lot of weight on your shoulders. In family businesses, you don't necessarily, maybe it's not as lonely, but you have other dynamics that can be difficult. For Carrie, you were talking about the next generation. There's lots of dynamics there. And hey, here's the keys. Now don't F it up, right? Yeah. So how do you make a difference? How do you innovate in that environment? So I think the life of an entrepreneur can be very satisfying. It can be, again, feeling very free, because we are choosing the life we lead, who we work with, and so on. But then there are times when you want to have trusted advisors around you. I like to say that entrepreneurs don't build businesses on their own. And so when it's time for them to make big decisions, whether it's selling your company or other big decisions, you want to surround yourself with trusted advisors who can help you collaborate on those big decisions. And certainly your spouse and your family could be part of your informal or formal advisory board if you have one of those.
Absolutely. There's something really important too about just understanding. I was just having a conversation with an entrepreneur the other day, and just knowing your weaknesses and then finding people who can offset those very specifically. And then developing enough trust with those people that then you can give them the reins on said topic, right? So, but that's a journey in and of itself, to understand what you're weak at authentically, and then create enough trust with someone else to be able to bridge that for you. But if you can get to that space, that's, I think, when a lot of magic can really start to happen. So, but I think Carrie wants to transition to some deep thoughts.
Yeah,
is that right?
Deep thoughts on Tandem Talks.
Yeah.
We've got a series of interesting questions, we think, that we want to draw out a little bit more, just getting to know you as a person, not even as an entrepreneur. So these can be short answers, long answers, whatever you're compelled to share, but we want to know the best compliment that you've ever received, maybe the most meaningful.
I was working at Ingersoll Rand Company. It was my first job out of college. It's a global manufacturer. And I was working in a town called Shippensburg, Pennsylvania, for the road machinery division. And we were nested between a cornfield and the high school. So hopefully I'm painting a good picture. This is a very down-to-earth type of environment. I had my internal clients when I was in human resources were people who wore suits and ran this division, and people who were on the shop floor and were painters, welders. We made rolling stock. Our pavers literally rolled out of the manufacturing facility. So those are the folks I'm working with. Third shift, second shift, first shift type folks. I was there 4 years. When I was leaving, they had a cake for me. We had a goodbye party. And one of the painters said, "Laurie, you're short, but you walk tall and carry a big stick." And I never knew where that paraphrase came from. But later on my podcast, when I ask everybody if they have a favorite quote, sometimes they quote Teddy Roosevelt, and I've figured out where that quote came from. It was adapted from him. Yeah. Walk tall, carry a big stick.
That gave me the chills. That's a beautiful story. And the bigger context of that is a really neat visual. So thank you for sharing. This is random, but what is a smell that makes you nostalgic?
Chicken soup.
Is that your upbringing or childhood it reminds you of?
Yeah. Mom making, chicken soup, matzo balls from scratch. Always brings it back.
Yeah, I love it. What song do you know by heart?
Sweet Caroline.
Neil
Neil Diamond,
right? Yes, that is a good one. That is a good one.
Your favorite art form. What's your favorite form of art?
Probably paint. My daughter is a painter, illustrator. You can't see them. They're on the walls in front of me. I asked her to draw 4 different types of flowers for me. They are in my office when I was a CEO. They're here now. A hydrangea, a rose, peony, and a bougainvillea. She drew those for me.
Very cool. Amazing. So our grand finale question is, who is the happiest person that you know?
I think my host family in Denmark, the husband and wife that I lived with, I think the wife, she's she's a very vivacious person and appreciates her life and those around her. And she's been an inspiration for me for all these years when we met when I was in college.
I love it. Well, Craig had the idea of making a book of all the compilation of the happiest people that everyone shares. So we'll add her to the list of people to dive deeper into. But I think there's probably a cultural element to that too. So it's neat to think about just globally how we define happiness and the things that we appreciate in life, and sometimes the simplicity. So you've got the floor. Any other closing comments? Any other last thoughts for the listeners? People who are trying to scale their business, or struggling, or thinking about how to do it. What would you leave them with?
I would say just go for it in the way that you feel most comfortable and have the confidence to keep moving forward. These small steps matter. Every day that you learn something, even if it doesn't go the direction you would have hoped, is a good day if you look at it that way. And don't be so hard on yourself. We can get really down on ourselves if we are highly motivated people who have high expectations for ourselves, and I'm one of them. And there's days I feel like, I should sort of start knocking myself down a little bit. And then I think, no, wait a minute. I'm not going to do that. And I have to kind of cut my own self-negative talk out of my head. And so I would say, just stay positive, know that you're on the right track, and know that it's going to work out for you, even if it takes a little bit longer than you thought.
And it so often does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Take longer than you think in the game of business ownership. Great. Well, you've got so many things going on. Just tell us a little bit where people can find you, and if there's any one particular client you want to be servicing right now, or that you think you can really help.
Absolutely. I love LinkedIn for connecting. You can find me on LinkedIn, Laurie Barkman, and DM me or send me an invitation to connect. And please, in your note, let me know that you heard me on this show. I think that would be great feedback for me. And also I'll share that with Carrie and Craig. And any other places to find me really would be on my website, SmallDotBig.com. I invite you to set up time to meet with me if you would like. I have a complimentary 20-minute call you can sign up for. If you're selling a business or you want to buy a business, if you want to be an entrepreneur through acquisition, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. And if you just want to connect generally in the world of being great referrals for each other, I'm happy to connect that way too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I think your insights are definitely unique. And I think love that you have your hand on the pulse of so many young people, as well as people buying and selling established businesses. So it's a really great range. I think I saw one of the organizations you're involved with was Defying Age of some sort, right? Or age defying non-ageism, basically in entrepreneurship, right? But I think a big part of what you talked about does bring us close to what matters most. And that's what Carrie and I, why we started businesses, why we continue to build businesses, is like, how do we use business ownership as a tool to create a fun, meaningful, enjoyable life? And it seems like you're really on that path or have figured it out. So thanks for sharing your insights today.
Yeah. And thanks for just the enriching discussion. I'm excited to double back on some of these resources that you mentioned, and we will also put them in the show notes for the listeners. And thanks so much for being on. And I hope everybody enjoys the grind and has a wonderful rest of the week. Take care.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to today's episode.
Please subscribe and leave a review, and be sure to visit tandemconsulting.co/talks.